Hello everybody. Today we are going to try to understand what is Orientalism, and this is the title of the book written by Edward Said no Edward Said. This the name would go on a long way to tell you why Edward Wadi Said went on to give his very popular book Orientalism, and which was written by the man who was formidably influenced by Michael Foucault, Derrida, Chomsky, and several other very prominent writers of his time. Edward Wadi Said was a professor of literature at Columbia University. He was a public intellectual and the founder of the academic field of post-colonial studies. So, his prominence stands as an academician in the prime, working in the era of post-colonial age, the age that had witnessed the freeing of humanity from the colonizers. So, Said carries the stints of his academics and his being a post-colonial entity. He was an American, he was a Palestinian born in America, and he was a citizen of the United States because his father was an US Army veteran. Now, let's come to the word Oriental. The word has the root word, it has originated from the root word Orient. Orient is primarily, it means from the east, of the east, from the direction of the rising sun. But it also has some connotations of being associated with the occult. Occult, the hidden sciences or systems that make a thing look like magic. So, Orient is about the East. Oriental, everything related to the East. The East place, the East people, the East psyche. And what all was about the Orient and the Oriental, and that came to be documented as a special branch of learning or expression, if not learning, special branch of expression, then that is Orientalism. This term was also coined by Edward Said. Why did he coin it? Because he had an assessment of what was going on in the post-colonial world. Only because he was of the post-colonial world was he able to understand what did the colonizers do to their colonies. The colonizers championed to speak about everyone with their own viewpoints. And when Edward Said read all that, made an assessment of all that which was about the Orient, the Oriental, he gave his theory of Orientalism. What is Orientalism according to Edward Said? He defined Orientalism as anyone who teaches, writes about, or researches the Orient. And this applies whether the person is an anthropologist, sociologist, historian, or philologist, either in its specific or in its general aspects, is an Orientalist, and what he or she says or does is Orientalism. We will read this definition once again to understand what drove Said to write down Orientalism, the book Orientalism. Because he had read people teaching about, people writing about, and researching about the Orient. Because the Westerners had settled on the soils of the eastern lands, they taught about them, they wrote about them, and also researched. Who were the people teaching and writing down and researching on the Orient? These were the anthropologists. Now, the satire comes here. Anthropologist. An anthropologist is a term given to a wealthy man, a man with great resources, extending his charity upon the poor people. So, people were teaching, writing, and researching on the Orient. Which people? The people who were really wealthy and who thought that who they were writing about were poor, were downtrodden, were wanting. So whatever was written about the Orient by the anthropologists, naturally, an anthropologist may go on to magnify the goodnesses of the ones who are wanting, or would he, in a way, magnify his own charity? And by sociologists, the people who interest themselves in the study of society, the various norms, the social systems, the social divisions, and the social exclusive structures and phenomena are sociologists. So there were the people from the West who went also as in search of some kind of knowledge of the East, because they settled there and they made their assessment of the Orient. Historians, people who document history, who excavate the remains of the civilizations from the ruins, and from there they make their assessment of what the people should have been like in that place. And they also make a very slant inclination of the roots, the genesis of the civilization that came. And philologists are the people who study literature, who interest themselves in the study of the established literature of a place and try to find analogy or differences or parallelisms. So these were the people who taught wrote about and researched the Orient, when they did this, they did it either in its specific or its general aspects. So, this is here that Edward Said strikes upon the focal point, that people made specific studies. They must have sampled them. They must have identified them on the basis of their differences from the West. Because specific underlies a kind of segregation, underlies a kind of differentiation from their own culture, from their own understanding, and from their own ways of life. So they made an analysis with an anthropologists, sociologists, historians, or philologists' point of view in the specific condition of the Orient, or they document upon its general aspects. Now, general aspects is trying to make an identification with, trying to find a similarity with. Whoever did this were, according to him, the Orientalists. And whatever he or she says or does is Orientalism. People from the West grafted themselves on the soils of the East, taught them, wrote about them, and researched on them. They researched even without searching into the psyche of the Orient. So, as we will later on come to understand, in fact, Orientalism is the term that denotes the exaggeration of difference. When Said says that these people were researching in its specific aspect, that means trying to harp upon the differences. But this was done as Said was moved to see. This was done with the presumption that West was superior to the East. And he was driven, Said was driven to write down his document of Orientalism because he found that there were some people writing about the West, and they chose to speak about they writing about the East, and they specifically chose to speak about the frailties, the inferiority, and of which the best example he gives is of Voltaire, the French writer, who documented the Easterners to be vulgar, very inferior, and very stupid. And as soon as his book became popular, there were several people trying their hands to make an assessment of the Easterners. And one book gave rise to the other, and there was a volley of expression that was derogatory in several means, in several aspects of the Easterners. So, Orientalism, the ism that we will be studying, as stated by Edward Said, the professor professed the differences, the derogatory tone, the derogatory treatment of the Easterners. I shall continue in the next lecture. But before I end, I would like to sum it up all by saying that a man who is of the post-colonial world now raises himself up to a position only in the guised spelling of his name, which was not SAYYEED, which was not SAYED, and which was also not SAYID, and taking refuge in this English cult, in this cult of the language English. He rose up to make a discreet statement of his anguish, his pain over what the Westerners frothed against the Easterners. And also, he discreetly puts it forward that this hegemony cannot be taken for granted any further. And the first definition we have discussed today. We shall discuss the second and the third definition given by Edward Said of Orientalism tomorrow.